Fáilte, and welcome to episode number 1 of Ancient Landscapes with myself, Tine. In this 6-part series, I will be selecting some of my favourite landscapes in Ireland's ancient East and taking a journey back through the ages to uncover some of their hidden mysteries. We'll explore the ruins of some of our most famous landmarks and the myths and legends which reside there, with interviews from experts and amateur enthusiasts alike to guide us along the way. In this episode named The Road to Destiny, we will travel from Dundalk to Tara via the string of ancient landmarks which punctuate the route and hint at the whereabouts of one of the 5 ancient roads which are said to have led to Tara from all corners of Ireland. This road, which began at Dunseverick on Antrim's northern coastline, was named Slane Luachra and is mentioned numerous times in the Dinshenachas, one of Ireland's medieval texts which deals with place names. The Dinshenachas does not give us the exact position of this famous road, and so we are left to guess at its location by examining the ancient settlements along the way and visiting them in turn to look for clues. When looking at the world's earliest roads, it's quite common for the Romans to be credited as the first pioneers of this field. Yet, there was evidence of a dense network of wooden tracks and roadways dating as far back as 6,000 years ago, found in an archaeological survey carried out in wetlands in Clune, County Longford, in 2006. It is of course possible that the location of the ancient road we're exploring today, the Slane Luachra, has changed over the millennia, much the same as roads can be rerouted today for the changing needs of their users. It's tempting to place a ruler between Dunseverick and Tara and see a straight line of modern settlements and roadways between the two. But in order to get an accurate account of the location of ancient routeways, it is necessary to take into account the natural features which would have defined their course through the landscape in the ages before industrialisation. The most notable feature of any journey made between north and south in ancient times would have been the Moira Pass, otherwise known as the Gap of the North. Between Mayo and Bangor there is an almost impenetrable barrier of stone drumlins entitled the Black Pig's Dyke, which has separated north from south since the formation of the land itself. The only 2 gaps in this hard-to-cross feature are the Lakelands in Fermanagh and the Gap of the North, which lies less than 3 kilometres north of the Hill of Slane. And so, due to the dense numbers of Neolithic findings and medieval structures located between Dundalk and Tara, it is reasonable to take Dundalk as an approximate starting point for our purpose of tracing the Slane Luachra between Tara and the northernmost limits of Magmorhevna, or modern-day County Louth. Well, we have to start somewhere. As we'll see a bit later in the series, the old town of Dundalk lay to the west of our modern town centre, around the area we now know as Castletown and the mound we call Cuchulain's Castle. It is known to have been inhabited since at least medieval times, but the folklore tells us it is much, much older. In fact, archaeological surveys at Little Mill, just west of the castle, have uncovered Stone Age settlements dating back thousands of years, amongst which was evidence of hearth fires and flints, which would have been used for working animal hides to provide shelter, clothing, and leatherwork. So a traveller on the ancient road between Tara and the northeast would have been assured of a meal and the other services they might need on their journey once they reached Dundalk. So what if our traveller isn't a person, but rather an army? Where could a group of hundreds or even thousands have found shelter and enough supplies to satisfy their needs when making their way southwards to the political centre of Ireland, as many did? For a good example of an army heading southwards, we can jump forward to medieval times, when Edward de Bruce landed 6,000 troops at Larne in County Antrim in the year 1315. In the midst of de Bruce's meandering and devastating campaign through Ireland, the annals of Clonmacnoise tell us that whilst coming south to meet Richard de Burgh, the Red Earl of Ulster, in battle, his army camped on the banks of the River Fane at Inniskeen. On his way out of Dundalk, de Bruce ransacked Castle Roche, less than 6 kilometres west of Cuchulain's Castle. We'll hear about this majestic site later in episode 5 of this series. De Bruce's army did not ultimately head southwards from Inniskeen, although the Red Earl's army did come north from Meath to meet him via Louth village, which offers a tantalising glimpse into the possibilities of Inniskeen, a medieval archdiocese, as a junction of sorts. In episode 3 of this series, we will hear about the prehistoric rock art situated near the village of Inniskeen, Some experts have proposed that such rock art was to be found near routeways and junctions, and so we will take a leap of faith and head south from here, on a long-established routeway past some of Louth and Meath's most recognisable ancient landmarks. Staying with our example of an army on the move, it is interesting to note that none of our stops today are further than 20 kilometres from each other. And as it happens, a distance of between 13 and 20 kilometres is about the average that an army would have been able to march in a day. Our next stop, just over 7 kilometres south of Inniskeen village, is Louth village, which was named after one of Ireland's most famous gods, Lugh, who also gave his name to County Louth, or Cunday Lugh. According to legend, there may once have been a shrine to Lugh situated here, although no trace of it exists. Rather, we have the remnants of an impressive 12th century monastery and the echoes of an earlier 6th century monastery which no longer exists today. The first medieval structure you see as you approach Louth village from the north is a simple oratory named St Mocta's House, after the Christian missionary who came from Britain and built his monastery here during the early days of Christianity in Ireland. Mocta was said to have been a disciple of St Patrick, and, according to one account, was brought to Ireland and reared as a member of the family by a druid named Hoam. The River Fane is linked to his path from his first established church at Kilmore to his later establishment at Louth village. The oratory we see today was dismantled and completely rebuilt in the 1920s in order to protect it from the damage done by ivy growing through it. Just 50 metres to the east of it lies the impressive ruins of St Mary's Augustinian Priory, which is thought to be one of the longest priories in Ireland at about 46 metres in length. It was originally established in the early 12th century by Donogh O'Carroll, the King of Oriel, although it was burned several times, and the ruins we see today are thought to be from the 1200s. St Mary's Priory is said to have played host to Edward de Bruce and his army as they travelled southwards in 1315. In fact, records reflect that the Prior of Louth was fined £40 for having done so, but was pardoned, which I'm sure came as a great relief. Wandering around the old graveyard which lies to the south and east of the priory, the Romanesque archways and windows visible in the walls of the ruined monastery give a very good impression of how it would have looked in the time of Edward de Bruce. It's not hard to see why he'd have chosen it as a stopover during a year when crops had failed, supplies were low, and starvation was an ever-present risk, even for the natives. Monasteries were known as places with plentiful supplies of food and wine for travellers and raiders alike. But moving onwards towards our destination, we travel 11 kilometres directly southwards and reach the town of Ardee. This ancient settlement was named for Ferdia, the best friend and foster brother of Cuchulainn, as the place where Ferdia fell, following a gruelling 4-day battle between the two. It is told in the Táin Bó Cúailnge that Ferdia only agreed to fight Cuchulainn as one of Maeve's champions after her daughter Finnbhar plied him with drink and seduced him when Maeve's attempts to berate him into the fight had failed. Ah, Ferdiad, betrayed to death. Our last meeting, oh how sad. Thou to die, I to remain. Ever sad our long farewell. Ardee is equidistant between Dundalk and Drogheda and lay on the western frontier of the area formerly known as the Pale. In 1999, a Neolithic house measuring 9.5 metres by 5.5 metres was unearthed by archaeological surveys on a site just 3 kilometres east of Ardee town. At the time, it was the oldest settlement that had ever been found in Ireland, although as we'll hear throughout the rest of the series, more have been found at almost every dig site in and around County Louth since then. In addition to this, Ardee town had an extremely rich medieval landscape, but much of that has disappeared since the 13th century due to continued development. There are, however, 2 notable exceptions which have survived until the present day. The first of these crenellated buildings is Ardee Castle, Ireland's largest fortified medieval tower house. This was previously known as St Leger's Castle and was built around the 1400s. During the 17th and 18th centuries it was used as a jail and later served as Ardee's courthouse, right up until 2006. The second medieval building still visible on Ardee's main street is Hatch's Castle. It was built around the late 1300s and given as a gift to the Hatch family by Oliver Cromwell. It's actually still providing hospitality in the form of Airbnb if you feel so inclined. So it's easy to see why Ardee would have been a common stopping point for travellers on the Slí Luachra, as they made their way southwards from Dundalk to Tara. And they would certainly have wanted to refresh themselves before travelling the 15.5 kilometres to the next major ancient settlement at Mellifont, near the village of Cullen on the border between Louth and Meath. Although no evidence of Neolithic settlement has yet been found in the area, a Bronze Age souterrain and encrusted urn were found in separate locations nearby. This suggests that there has been habitation in the village of Cullen for at least 2,500 years. Unfortunately, not everyone who lived here throughout the ages was enamoured with the area. You may remember we mentioned the King of Oriel, Donogh O'Carroll, as the founder of St Mary's Priory in Louth Village. O'Carroll was one of the most prominent supporters of the ecclesiastical reform movement, and during his time as king in the mid-12th century, he granted a secluded site on the banks of the River Mattock, a tributary of the Boyne, to St Malachy, the Bishop of Down, who wanted to build a Cistercian monastery like the one he had experienced in Clairvaux in France during his pilgrimage to Rome. Upon arriving in Rome, St Malachy actually asked the Pope to relieve him of his priestly duties so that he might join the Cistercian order himself, but the Pope refused and instead promoted him to ensure his focus remained on his duties in reforming the Irish Church. Instead, Malachy opted to bring Cistercianism to Ireland by establishing Fons Mellis, which meant font of honey and translates today as Mellifont. He brought over a mixed group of French monks and the Irish monks whom he had left behind him in Clairvaux, France. The group included one French monk named Robert, who would oversee the building of a monastery in the French style. The French monks, however, had difficulty mixing with the Irish and soon left to return to France. Very little remains of the breathtaking monastery they built for St Malachy, although the ruins we see today are still very impressive. A row of Romanesque archways leads towards the two-storey octagonal lavabo, at the centre of which would have stood a ritual font, visible through the symmetrical arched doorways which are largely still intact. The only building remaining at Mellifont which still contains a roof is the vaulted chapter house which overlooks the lavabo. The detailed stonework at Mellifont is a testament to its builders, who spared no expense in worshipping their god through their material efforts during its construction. Carved pillar details have withstood the test of time and, in the medieval era, would have rendered any working-class visitors who were lucky enough to see it utterly speechless, as they marvelled at architectural skill which surely could only have come from God himself. We mustn't linger any longer though, since we have one more stop to make before our final destination at Tara, the inaugural and political centre of ancient Ireland, in what used to be Ireland's 5th province of Meath. Google Maps tells us that the Hill of Slane is 8.7 kilometres south of Mellifont Abbey, but it's actually closer as the crow flies. I myself have actually never visited the Hill of Slane, and so for this portion we decided to take the opportunity to make the trip and experience it for ourselves. So first impressions as you pull up in the car park of Slane Hill, and you've got these two really impressive 16th century ruins right facing you, the church and the college. And as we draw nearer now, we get a great look at some of the really well preserved stone window frames here on the college. And the first person to greet us as we come in the graveyard gate is a statue of St Patrick, who of course has very strong associations with this place. It's thought that it's here that he lit the Paschal fire ahead of the king, which was a big no-no. And just as we've done a half turn of the graveyard, we stumble upon the two great standing stones which are thought to be the ruins of St Eric's tomb. And of course, both stones are completely covered in this pale silver algae, and the view of the mountains in the distance is just spellbinding as you stand between the two of them. The carved faces in the rock remind us that although closely associated with St Patrick, the Hill of Slane is also a deeply important pagan site. There's said to have been a shrine on site here. Some say it was magical, others say it was dedicated to the Tuatha De Danann. All agree that it resided here long before the 16th century ruins we see today, and that it was pagan. But I think we'll have to cut this stop on the trip short for now. It's time for our next stop. And so we have arrived at the end of the road, the mystical complex of ancient sacred sites we call the Hill of Tara. Here we find a varied selection of features which date from all eras of history and prehistory, right back to the Stone Age. Amongst these are several examples of standing stones, including the famous Leah Fall, which was used as the coronation stone for high kings since time immemorial, and was said to be one of the 4 treasures brought to Ireland by the Tuatha Dé Danann when they arrived. I've decided to leave further description of Tara to this week's guest, journalist, author and astronomer Anthony Murphy, who you might know from his Mythical Ireland YouTube channel. Anthony is based in Drogheda and has intimate knowledge of the site.
Tara, in terms of the centre of the political centre, as it were, the centre of kingship, is an interesting one as to how that happens. So one of the things that's really missing, I suppose is a good word, from the picture of Tara is the Neolithic stuff isn't all that grandiose. The mound of the hostages is a small mound. Now, when it was excavated, it was packed with human remains. A lot of people interred in there. And you have that Chachmi Chorta, the banqueting hall, that a lot of archaeologists think is a Neolithic cursus. I think that's a practical notion. I think the idea of some sort of giant wooden banqueting hall, I mean, just the timbers and the size of the roof would have had to have been extraordinary. I'm not sure. I would follow the archaeologist's logic on that front. In the traditions of Tara, kingship actually goes as far back as the Dé Danann mythology. Of course, the scholars would never, for them all of this is medieval mythology. But for me, when I see Dé Danann mythology, I'm more inclined to think that that's something that goes all the way back to the Neolithic, simply on the basis of some of the myths about Brú na Bóinne, pertaining to aspects of the monuments that couldn't have been known in the Middle Ages. That information, in my view, almost certainly came by word of mouth from the time the monuments were built and in use. Cotmai Chura is where Nuadu is celebrating his return to the throne after the deposing of Bress, that half Fomorian guy who took the kingship and everything went to, and I'm interested in that. The fact that it is actually in the Dé Danann mythology that the kingship at Tara, being a location for kingship, is established. There was the discovery about 20 years ago by the Discovery Programme of that giant circular, hidden beneath the ground, basically the remnants of what looks like it's probably a henge, which would be late Neolithic. Tara, like a lot of places, suffers from a lack of excavation. I mean, the Mount of the Hostages was excavated. There was an excavation of Ardee, which the other big ring that encircles the other monuments on the hill, which produced an Iron Age date, and you're left wondering, was that possibly? Is it out of the question that was an earlier structure? That might have been a henge itself, a late Neolithic thing, and then even down to the Rath of the Synods, which is apparently so named because 3 saints had synods there in, I think, 5th, 6th, 7th century sort of era. St. Patrick was one, St. Adovnon, but yet Rath of the Synods is almost certainly predates Christianity, and most likely has a Bronze Age barrow incorporated into it. So again, you're seeing earlier monuments, but possibly being repurposed. And if you think about Tara and the notion of 5 roads leading to Tara, I think that's fascinating, because Tara is not at all central. Tara is only central in political terms. It's the centre of Brea. It's the centre of probably the most fertile part of Ireland. It is the region that you can imagine there being a lot of contention about, because whoever rules it is going to feed everyone, basically, right? In the story of the settling of the Manor of Tara, it's to do with the way Tara is laid out. That there's a let's call it a sacred cosmological influence there, in terms of how the monuments are situated, where the monument is, where the hill is situated. I know the hill is there; they couldn't situate it there. But for instance, one of the fascinating things about Tara is it's actually located between the estuary and the source of the Boyne, pretty much on a straight line. not halfway, but you're looking towards summer solstice sunrise, and you're looking at the estuary at Drogheda, and you're looking at winter solstice sunset, and you're looking at She Nectin and the well of Nectin or Segish, the source of the Boyne. So I'm interested in that notion of arteries, but I just wonder how much of either the story of Tara has been influenced by Uisneach or vice versa.
Before we finished up, I wanted to ask Anthony about the significance of the stars to our ancient ancestors, as well as how this would have affected their choice of locations for their sacred sites, the roads they forged, and the stories they told as a way of passing on this important information.
It's very difficult to imagine any society, any pre-literate, pre-technological society, not only relying upon astronomy, but having this innate awareness of it. It's just second nature, actually. For us, it's much more difficult because we live in brightly lit houses with ceilings. We've actually blocked out the night sky, so no wonder we're so unfamiliar with how the intimate workings of it. My own view is that in the Neolithic, the reverse of that is the case. All of this stuff is intimate knowledge from a young age. It's basic survival stuff. You're watching migratory patterns. You're watching the movement of animals. You're watching the movement of the sun up and down along the horizon. And as it gets higher and lower in the sky, you're watching each passing revolution of the moon from dark moon to full moon and back again. And then watching as the star patterns slowly change from season to season. And, you see Orion. Well, we see it in the winter now, and they would have saw it sort of closer to spring. But, Orion disappears in the summer. I mean, it's nearly midsummer now as we're talking, and Orion is completely invisible to everybody in the world because the sun is in that part of the sky. So unless there's a total solar eclipse, nobody's going to see Orion for another 6 or 8 weeks until the sun moves past enough that Orion becomes visible in the morning sky again. So I just think in the Stone Age, and probably actually since the first time we could talk and communicate, and I think we've probably been conscious of such things as, the waxing and waning of the moon, basically since we first had conscious thought. When you pare it all back, astronomy, in terms of Neolithic astronomy, is not complex. It's actually about patterns. It's about recognising and observing and recording patterns. How did they record them? I think in some cases it's on the stones at Brunabonia, but I think a lot of it would have been mnemonic or told through rhyme or story or song. Make names for stars and star groupings and talk about when the moon's going to be full. All these stories about the cattle crossing the river in Irish mythology. Mythology is so full of references to cattle. And there's this specific line in Amergin's chant when Amergin arrives at the Milesians where he says, "Who sees the cattle rise out of the plain of Tethra and shine in the bright heavens?" And I'm thinking, what are cattle coming out of the sea? Well, it turns out that the plain of Tethra is a poetic kenning for the sea. So he's talking literally about the stars and the planets rising out of the sea and being seen to shine in the bright heavens. And all of this stuff about guarding the ford, well, there are 2 crossing points in the sky where the planets and the sun and the moon cross over the Milky Way, which is the heavenly river, to Awe, as it were, like my own town, Drogheda, the bridge at the ford. The Awe was the crossing point, and the cattle could move sometimes back and forth because some of the planets appear to go into retrograde motion. They're going one direction, then they turn on their heels and go back the other direction, then loop back again. And there are references in like that in the Tine, for instance, and you're just looking at that going, that sounds instinctually to me like references to heavenly movements, If you're a farming community, I'd like to know how you would survive in the Neolithic without an intimate level of astronomical knowledge.
So as we hang up our boots on this first leg of our journey, which brought us from Dundalk down the Slane Middle-Uchra to the ancient province of Meaja to one of the jewels in Ireland's sacred landscape, the complex at Tara, I'd like to give thanks to you for joining us and to Anthony Murphy for his insight on all things ancient and cosmological. Be sure to tune in next time for another famous and ancient journey, which passed through the town of Dundalk. This time it's the one undertaken by Queen Maeve during her infamous cattle raid of Cooley. We'll be speaking to Professor Paul Gosling, an expert in Tine-related place names, and we'll be hearing about some of the misconceptions around Maeve's journey and the locations she would have visited. Thanks to David Bellew on sound and to Dundalk FM for their support in making this programme. I've been your host, Tara Tine, and these are our ancient landscapes.